Hello, good evening, namaskara, and welcome to BIC Streams. Our Man in Cairo, Syed Hussein, an unsung hero. This discussion with Sobha Vishwanathan and NS Vinod looks to offer an illuminating narrative of Hussein's life, interspersed with historical details that landscapes a vivid political picture of that era. Through primary sources that include Hussein's private papers, British intelligence files, and contemporary correspondence and newspapers, N.S. Vinod's book brings to life a man who has been relegated far too long to the shadows of time. And through this discussion, we try and discover a little bit about this enigmatic personality. The bios of both the speakers will appear in your chat box. And through the session, and at any point, if you feel like making a comment, an observation, sharing an observation, or asking a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, I hand it over to Shobha and Vinod.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all those who've made this event possible happen. And it's wonderful to be able to do this from New York and Bangalore, appreciating the opportunities that have come up this way. When Priya Swami floated the idea of this public conversation about your book, Vinod, I was thrilled to note the coincidence that it's Syed Hussein's birthday today. And when we connected earlier and I asked you whether you're observing it in any way, you didn't let me down. You were observing it in some way. So it will be nice to share that. How did you celebrate Syed's birthday?
I'll request Lekha to share the video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, before we begin our session on my book, A Forgotten Ambassador in Cairo, The Life and Times of Syed Hussein, I'd like to say that today is actually a momentous day. It is Syed Hussein's birth anniversary, 23rd January. It is his 133rd birth anniversary. And to celebrate the birthday of this man, this forgotten man who did so much for our country, let's begin the session by cutting a cake in his honor. Here we go. And with that, Shobha, I hand over the mic to you for you to begin the session. Thank you.
That was lovely. That cake really looks awesome. I wish I was taking a bite out of it. Now to jump right in, the very, very obvious first question about your meticulously researched book. By the way, I have to hold up the hard copy. I know you have those copies in the back. They're really lovely edition, and it's a pleasure to hold in hand and read. My very first question, and the obvious one, is how did you decide to write about Syed Hussein? How did you find out about him? How did you decide to write about him?
Thank you, Shobha. So my journey actually began a few years ago, 3 years ago, when I went to Cairo in March of 2018. And the guide there, seeing that I was an Indian, said, "Look, can I take you to a tomb of an envoy?" I said, "Fine." I didn't expect, what the tomb would contain. But when I went there, what I found was that it was in the city of the dead, which houses, thousands and thousands of tombs. So he took me to a large compound. It was in a very sort of a dirty street, ill-maintained. And Lekha, can you show that photograph, please, of the first photograph where the tomb is located? So this is what I saw. I mean, as you can see, the surroundings are pretty ill-maintained, but the entry to the tomb was through that green gate that you see. So when I entered the tomb, what I saw was Lekha, the next one, please. So this was the marble tomb inside this large compound, but it was very badly maintained. In fact, this looks better. When I first entered, all that stuff that you see at the back, they were all
Yeah.
piled on top of the marble tomb. So
Oh, really?
the caretaker hurriedly sort of cleaned it up and at least made the tomb clean. So then I saw the inscription, which was in both English and Arabic. It says, you know, Syed Hussein buried here, first Indian ambassador to Egypt. That sort of got me thinking. I mean, this man who was an ambassador from India to Egypt, why is he buried here? Why is he not buried in India? And then I sort of began to read about him, do research, meet people. And what I found was that he was generally associated with, being very briefly married to Nehru's sister, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. She was at that time known as Sarup Nehru. But beyond that, there was very little that was said or written about him. But once I sort of began to delve more deeply into his life, I found a fascinating person, a person who was so well versed in the English language, an orator, a writer, represented the country in the Khilafat delegation that went to UK, fought for the civil rights of Indians in the US, and he was Mahatma Gandhi's sole representative, sort of an unofficial representative in the US. So he was a fascinating person. And I think there's hardly anything that does justice to him in terms of how we recognize him or how we sort of retain his memory. So I thought, okay, let's do that. And the book is a result of that research.
It's really, as you pointed out, given how much he has done, it is mind-boggling that none of us have heard, well, I shouldn't say none of us have, people with fair degree of exposure to history have still not heard of him, and he's very, very much a forgotten, unsung hero, as the description says. And I'm grateful that you got to explore that spark from your visit in Cairo and access as many of the papers and the research. We know that's mind-boggling. Many of us would have probably spotted the tomb, done a little bit of research, maybe shared a dinner story or two with friends, maybe written a blog. So how did you decide that you will take this on? Because it's a thesis of sorts what you've produced, because while that photo shows where you started, what you've got at the end of it is really extensive look at not just Syed Hussein's life, but also the times. It's a book that felt eye-opening to me in many ways because of all the papers you've accessed and the context that you have provided. So what made you, what motivated you to take it to that extra step of moving from just keeping it a story that you share with friends to creating a book out of it?
So initially my plan was to write a blog about this person. But then when I got more involved with his life, I said, look, a blog is not going to do this man justice. Let's attempt a book. And then, of course, my research, I first contacted his nephew who was living in Dhaka. Then I met Mrs. Nayanthara Sehgal, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit's daughter. Then I met a scholar in the United States. She teaches at the University of Ohio. She had done a study of Syed Hussein's newspaper, The Orient. It was an academic study. So I met a lot of people, saw a lot of places. I went to where his house would have been in Calcutta. I went to Anand Bhavan in Allahabad. Just saw Lincoln's Inn, where he studied. So it took me to 3 continents, but it was a fun experience and very educative. And certainly the book is a product of meetings with all these people, seeing all these places, and the research that I did at Columbia University Library, as well as in the British Library in London.
You're talking to people. When you said you spoke to someone who had done research on the Orient, I was thinking you have pretty much produced the exhaustive thesis on Syed Hussein at this point. Is there any other research work that you know of Syed Hussein that you came across?
There are very few articles that are available about him on the internet, but there is no biography of him. There is a short compendium of the speeches that he gave, but that's about it. There is no biography written of him.
Okay. This is something that came up in our conversation earlier. So I like the point that you made. You were venturing into history as a person with a very different background from engineering and corporate executive and all that. How did you frame that approach in your mind? How did you tackle the topic?
I'm not a historian. I'm not a trained historian. So, but of course, I was always interested in history from a very lay person's point of view, reading, traveling, and such like. So, what I have produced is not really a historical work. I would say I'm more of a chronicler of his life, not a historian. What I would expect is that this work, which is probably the first chronicle of his life, serves as a basis for historians, political commentators to probably take this forward to the next step, to analyze what were his contributions, to analyze what was the effect that he had on some of the policies that were framed in the United States or in India. I would expect this book to probably lead to that.
Spark more of a conversation, I guess. Yeah. But when you said you had a layperson's interest in history, to me, I think that is part of what enabled you to make this so much more than a blog post, as you said, because I think very early in the book, you referenced the fact that you'd heard of Syed Hussein in one passing reference in Mattai's book. So even those kind of connections were possible because you've always been interested in this Indian history, but also in personalities and people and things like that, right?
Yeah, it is a general reading of what anyone would do who's interested in Indian history, but not nothing too deep. But yes, some of these references I did remember and said, yeah, I mean, Mattai had written about this person. Mattai, incidentally, for those who probably don't know that part of India's history, was the personal secretary to Jawaharlal Nehru during the early 1950s. And in 1977, he wrote two books. One was called The Reminiscences of the Nehru Age, and the other was My Days with Nehru. Sort of on the fact that the dead cannot defend themselves. So it was somewhat salacious. Okay, so anyway, we'll leave it at
that. But it definitely introduces us to a lot of personality. So it was good that you made the connection and could take it forward, I think. I also personally found I think Syed Hussein's writings that you have added in the appendix were very fascinating to me because that was where his voice and his contribution came across. And in many ways, I was thinking about it even now as you spoke, that he was Gandhi's unofficial representative in the United States. And I thought he was a lobbyist before we knew the word lobbyist, probably. The notion of going into another country and making your case very articulately. That is the repeated thing in all your contemporaneous references. People who heard him speak repeatedly talk about how powerful a speaker he was and how articulate he was in making his point. And that comes across in the appendix. And I have to say that I did feel like some of what he said then foreshadows some of the videos which we have been seeing go viral lately. So, I mean, it's amazing the points that have stood the test of history, so to speak, and yet we haven't heard enough of this in our history books. So I would love for you to share some of Hussein's points about imperialism and colonialism that he wrote about and spoke about in his speeches.
So if I were to sort of start the chronology a little earlier. And I talk about this in my book, where I talk about the early Indian immigrants to the United States. This whole thing started in 1904 and started with the Sikhs who went there to work in the Canadian Pacific Railway, as well as in the agricultural farms of California. They were subjected to a huge amount of racism. And so much so that the racism became so bad and there was such a large anti-Indian feeling that in a very famous case of 1923, which is called the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind, Indians lost their citizenship rights in the United States. Not only were Indians prevented going forward to get citizenship rights, but those Indians who had already got citizenship rights legally were also denaturalized. So what happened was a lot of Indians who had bought property lost their property because they lost citizenship rights. So all this created a huge amount of discord within the Indian community. We had activists who were sort of before Syed Hussain, which is the Ghadar party and so on. And then of course in the 1920s, starting with Syed Hussain and then J.J. Singh, Haridas Mazumdar, Tarak Nath Das, all these people took up the cause. All these people took up the cause of Indian civil rights in the United States. So Syed Hussain was probably the first of these modern intellectuals who came to the States in 1921. He spoke extensively on the evils of colonialism, believing that colonialism fostered racism in a way. The two were intimately connected. It's because there was a colonial government in India which was not willing to stand up for its citizens' rights elsewhere that racism prevailed in the United States and in other parts of the world. So the two are intimately connected. So independence in India would lead to less of racism elsewhere. So their fight was actually on two folds. One is Indian independence, second was fight for civil rights in the US. And this is what he tried to sort of spread the message to the intellectuals, to the leaders, to the influencers in the US, saying that Indian independence is paramount. And he was Gandhi's unofficial sort of representative in the US, spoke extensively, covered all the 50 states in the United States in the first 4 years of his being there.
Yeah, I'll be happy to share what got me very excited about the book. As a person with a lay interest in history, this was a very nice mix of introduction to a lot of characters who we were familiar with, but also contextualized them differently. Definitely found it Vinod is back. You were talking about how racism and colonialism are how Syed fought it on two different fronts. The battle was being fought on two different fronts, is what you were making the point about.
Yeah. So he traveled, the length and breadth of the United States, spreading Gandhi's message of Indian independence, because he felt that the two are intimately connected. Independence in India would lead to less of racism in the US.
Yeah, when you were talking about the Indian, actually we have segued between two different points that I'm very interested in. So let me go back to the point that you made about the early immigrants to North America. And I found it mind-boggling, some of the stories, partly because I guess we don't think far enough back about when the migration started. The sheer gall of the British in using Indian soldiers in some of their battles and closing the doors in some other places. I think it's worth mentioning here, and people should read your book for just finding out that segment of how countries have had policies that are, how did they even justify it in terms of internal logic didn't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying? So could you share a little bit of what you found out about the early North American policy positions that they held?
So
Canada. I'm talking about Canada. Yeah.
So this is sort of a very sorry state of affairs that the Indians faced. So Indians went there in, as I said, in 1904. And a lot of them had served in the British Army, in the British police forces, not just in India, but also in Hong Kong to Sudan, which were British colonial units. So after a lot of these people retired from service, either from the military or from the police, they went to Canada, hoping that since Canada was a part of the British Empire, they would be welcomed as fellow citizens of the British Empire and allowed to settle work out there. However, Canada had different, completely different ideas, and Canada introduced laws to prevent these people from coming in. There was, similar to what the US had introduced, there was first the Chinese Exclusion Act and then the Asian Exclusion Act and so on. And this whole thing ended it blew up in 1914 when this ship called the Komagata Maru, containing about 200 odd Sikh laborers from Punjab, was stopped at Vancouver port, and these people were not allowed to board, rather come on board. So for 2 months, these 200 people stayed on the ship, and then finally they lost the court case in Canada and the ship was sent back. So when the ship returned to Calcutta, these people, instead of being allowed to land safely, the police opened fire on them, and almost about 12 of these people died. So Komagata Maru incident remains one of the highlights of the sufferings of Indian immigrants who wanted to immigrate to Canada. And this was a turning point in the history of Indian immigration, in the sense that it turned the sentiments of Indians against the British. But despite that, nonetheless, a lot of Sikhs, a lot of Indians continued to fight in the British Army in the First World War. But this nonetheless had the effect of significantly breaking the loyalty of a number of these Sikhs to the British.
Fittingly so. If you're treated so differently in different places in the world, we make up our mind in the way they treat us everywhere, not just in one place or the other, right? So the other aspect of the whole, you referenced the fact that there was a huge effort and push in America to facilitate citizenship rights, and the names and people there, some really interesting personalities. And again, it's interesting because many of them on their own initiative took up the effort to carry on a conversation for Indian independence. And because without US pressure, Britain may not have even moved as fast as it did in terms of independence. So the fight in America made sense, and there are personalities there who spent a lot of time and effort and money, and yet we don't always hear about them, I think. And J.J. Singh was quite a character. What did you find out? I liked these stories that you had introduced of people, the names, the Haridas Mazumdar, so many fascinating stories. I know we can't go into all of it, but could you share a little bit about J.J. Singh?
So J.J. Singh is a very interesting character. So he's again from the Punjab, moved to the United States as an immigrant in 1930, and established an organization called the India League of America. So he and what the work that Syed Hussain had started 10 years earlier was taken up by J.J. Singh. And for a number of years, a lot of these people worked together. Now, the interesting thing about J.J. Singh is that his granddaughter, Sabrina Singh, is today the Deputy Press Secretary of the White House.
Yes.
Okay, and what is even
it's
more
so
interesting...
It's so fitting.
So Sabrina Singh has actually said that she owes her stint in the United States to the work that her grandfather did. And what is equally interesting is that J.J. Singh, Syed Hussain, Haridas Mazumdar, all these people who fought for Indian civil rights in the US, their effort culminated when President Truman in 1946 signed what was then known as the Luce Cellar Bill, which gave back citizenship rights to the Indians with a quota of 100 people per year. So that, in fact, was what started the or restarted
Ways.
the immigration of Indians to the United States. But this time it was not the agriculturists who went there, but these were qualified people, scientists, engineers, and so on. So note the date, it was 1946. The next significant date is 1957, when the first Asian American, Dalip Singh Sound, from California was elected as a Democratic candidate to the House of Representatives. So he was the first Asian American elected to the House of Representatives. That tradition is followed with Kamala Harris now being the Vice President of the United States. So Kamala Harris's mom, Shushila,
Shamla.
Shamla.
Shamla Gopalan. Yeah.
Shamla would not have become a citizen of the US but for the efforts of Syed Hussein
Syed Hussein.
and J.J. Singh and so on. So we owe a lot to these
know.
people.
When people say they stand on the shoulders, we all stand on the shoulders of the work that went before. It really is a case of the very,
Yes,
very
yeah.
intense work that was done earlier, I think. I mentioned this earlier, and I'd really like to go back to it if possible, this notion from the appendix and foreshadowing, because uh, I think when we were talking about this earlier, we were saying that when we, Sashi Tharoor's recent video, not recent, he made the speech a few years ago, but I think it's been doing its loop again on social media. You must have, you know what I'm talking about, right? Where he's taking Winston Churchill to task. And I see that letter from Syed Hussein being absolutely that kind of spirit of how dare you talk about democracy and liberalism and look at the way you're treating India questions that he asked there. Syed
Yeah,
Hussein.
it's interesting you bring up that Sashi Tharoor's speech. This was actually given at the Oxford debate, where he says that Britain should in fact pay restitution to India for all the loot that they did. And he also brings up Churchill's example as the height of racism, where Indians didn't have food to eat, and Churchill yet diverted food from India to the soldiers of Second World War and said that let Indians die. And this actually resulted in the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, where millions died. So it's interesting that when Churchill visited the United States in, I think it was in 1943, Syed Hussein actually took a half-page newspaper advertisement, and it was an open letter to Churchill. So Churchill, who was with President Truman at the time, or I think it was President Roosevelt, saw this article and he was furious, and he threw the newspaper down and said, how can this be published in the US? And Roosevelt had to tell him that, look, in the US, anyone can pay for a newspaper ad and publish whatever they want. But that was a very significant sort of effort which was made by Syed Hussein. And I think that speech actually is now part of the congressional records in the US.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that advertisement is part of the congressional records. Yeah.
It's a really powerful piece of writing, so I can understand why it needs to be archived. And I recommend everybody read all the appendix material that we know that's provided, because some of it is really where we see the voice of Syed Hussein, and it's we can understand why he was such a successful speaker and why the British speakers who debated him on stages were in awe of his ability to get his point across. I think there was some honest criticism from one of the debaters' supervisors about how Hussein beat his guy because he was more articulate and more cogent in his arguments, right? I mean, there was that where the enemy gave him a compliment. That's what he had said.
I think the actual comment was that this person who was representing the British fell in front of Hussein like a house of cards.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
so powerful was Hussein's speech, which this person could not adequately sort of have arguments against.
Counter it in any way, yeah. The other very, very interesting human element part of Syed Hussein's life, and which was invariably a hook for many of us who found the story intriguing is Syed Hussain was briefly married to Vijayalakshmi Pandit. And you do go into some of the details of that in the book, and it's fascinating to find out what happened in their relationship. But there are also many other strong friendships and alliances that Syed Hussain formed over time. Can you share a little bit of some of your impressions of the other relationships that you felt were interesting and noteworthy? I was rather intrigued by his changing, evolving relationship with Jinnah particularly, but anything else you'd like to share, I'd like to hear more about that too.
I think the relationship with Jinnah was possibly one of the high points of his career, apart from his relationship with Gandhi. With Gandhi, it was a master disciple kind of a relationship. Syed Hussain was absolutely devoted to Gandhi and remained so for the rest of his life. With Jinnah, he first met Jinnah when he was in London, as a student at Lincoln's Inn. And then subsequently, when Syed Hussain joined the Bombay Chronicle as assistant editor, Jinnah was the chairman of the newspaper. So Syed Hussain always had an admiration for Jinnah. He actually called him as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. And not surprising, because history will tell you that during the Lucknow Pact, Jinnah and Gandhi actually came together and were pretty united in their approach towards the British. However, all this changed, over the years, and Jinnah became a sort of a fanatical proponent of an independent country, Pakistan. So Syed Hussain fell out with Jinnah at that time. So Syed Hussain believed in the civilizational unity of India and did not believe that Pakistan was ever going to be a viable proposition. Part of that may be true, but nonetheless, he fell out with Jinnah on that. He wrote very critical pieces, spoke very critically against Jinnah's advocacy for an independent country. So that was one relationship. The second is that I find that Syed Hussain was always fascinated by very strong women. So one was, of course, Vijayalakshmi Pandit. The second was Sarojini Naidu. The third was a lady by name Julia Ford, who was one of the socialites in New York. And Sarojini Naidu writes about Julia Ford, saying that everyone from the President of the United States was scared of this lady. So, but she developed a very close friendship with Syed Hussain, despite the difference in their age. So this is one recurring theme which I find in Hussain's life, that he was fascinated with strong women and equally respected by them.
That's a very telling thing, I think, the kind of relationships that he built across countries and cultures. He was able to find points of contact and nourish those relationships over time, because even though he moved from place to place, and he still kept these contacts going strong. And we are talking about an era where immediate contact was not possible. So it's all definitely, it must have taken time and effort to make it sustain. The other part about the Jinnah relationship, since you mentioned it, is I thought it must have been personally very challenging for Syed Hussain, because many in his circle of family and friends did make the move to Pakistan when we had the separation, and he made the choice to stay on, obviously, because he became India's ambassador. So did you get a sense of his personal communication with family and friends? I know you connected with his family members later on. What did you feel what was their feeling about how he made his choices?
Syed Hussain chose to stay back in India. So he was very clear that he was not going into Jinnah's country.
Yeah.
However, after partition, and it was not just at the time of partition, but over the next few years, a lot of his relatives did move to Pakistan. Some moved to West Pakistan, some moved to what was East Pakistan in those days. Except one, his his niece, that is his sister's daughter, she was married to one Mr. Ikramullah ICS, who became the first foreign secretary of Pakistan. But they continue to have a good relationship because her name is Shaista Ikramullah, that is his niece. Uh, she was also a delegate from Pakistan to the United Nations. And she actually had a close relationship with Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, who was India's delegate to the United Nations. So Shaista Ikramullah writes in her autobiography about her close relationship with Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, and there's a photograph of them sharing a joke. So I think in those days, despite the fact that a lot of families had people divided between the two countries, they still shared that sort of relationship, which was not, how shall we say, not
Acrimonious only. There was also
not
love and
acrimonious,
affection.
not acrimonious as what we would find today.
Okay. That's interesting understanding of that time, I think. And I have to register with happiness and pride that both Pakistan and India sent women representatives very early on to the United Nations. It's a good thing. I would, as we sort of talk a little bit more, I'd like people who are listening and watching from wherever to start thinking in terms of questions they'd like to ask Vinod about the book or about the context of the book. So if you could just add that to the Q&A, that will be great. Vinod, now that you have now that you have got this book out there, what are your hopes for the book? I mean, what do you see coming out of it in terms of where it can go?
I have hopes that it can be made into a movie. Okay, so let's see. I mean, it certainly has enough material, the romance, the tragedy, the poignant relationship with Syed Hussain shared with a lot of people. I think it will make a good movie, or at least a serial. So hopefully my literary agent will take this as a hint to sort of explore this idea with people. Secondly, like I said earlier, Syed Hussein's life was not well documented. And as I said, I, in the role of a chronicler, have done that. Hopefully, this will be a stepping stone for historians and academics to explore his role in the Indian freedom struggle much deeper, and also document the role of Indians in America who did so much to lobby for Indian independence there. That's a story which has been told, but not in much detail, because there's still a heap of material that has not yet been explored and not yet sort of published. And I especially refer to the British intelligence papers. There's a heap of material there which I'm sure would interest a lot of historians, and we would certainly like to know that story.
Yeah, I love the idea of a movie. It's a period piece waiting to happen, I can imagine, across India and England and US. And knowing Priya, I'm sure she has already got this idea out there and is making it happen. The thing about the Indian American history and narrative and worth reporting, I hear you, because even though I have some interest in and I have read some of it, there were so many names that were brand new to me in what you had shared. And it was eye-opening. The notion of, I believe it was Mazumdar who used to do soapbox speeches outside Columbia University about it. Am I remembering the name right? It was Mazumdar, right?
Haridas Mazumdar was the person, yeah.
Yeah, that he would just put up a box and stand outside the university and talk about British colonialism was really, and he made an appearance in some American literature later on as a character like that, right?
That's right. I think Henry Miller used him as one of the characters in his novel. And not just that, Mazumdar was friends with Eamon de Valera of the Irish independence movement. So a lot of these people had very
These cross
fascinating network.
connections.
Yeah. I mean, they had a relationship with the NC, what that, National Colored People's Association.
NCWCP, yeah.
friends with Roger Baldwin and all these guys. It was fascinating to see the kind of networks they had.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be reported more. I hope there is occasion for somebody to take it on as a project in different levels. I think the stories need to be told, unsung heroes all over the place, right? So I hope the books get written and
Yeah.
movies get made. I'm opening the Q&A, Vinod. So if I'm squinting at the screen, it's because I'm also reading as I talk to you.
Yeah.
I believe the first question here is, did you use the archives in Cairo or any other archive? This is from
So I
Mrs. Isabella Simon, the question, yeah.
okay. So I really wanted to have access to the archives of the Ministry of External Affairs, not just in Cairo, but also in New Delhi. But somehow our foreign ministry is very, very cagey about letting researchers, scholars access their archives. So that was pretty much a black box. So I could not have access to the foreign ministry papers. But otherwise, my research was primarily confined to the British Library in London, the New York Public Library, and the Columbia University Library. And this was outside India. Within India, it was the Nehru Memorial Library.
Okay. The next question, I'm glad this has been brought up because this is something we wanted to go into also. Dr. M.A. Khan wants to know, what were his years in Cairo? How many years was he there?
Oh, it was actually very brief. He was India's ambassador just for 1 year. He went there in February 1948, soon after Gandhi's assassination, and he died in February 1949. So possibly a little over a year.
But it is telling that he had that his impact is still to be recognized because he set the tone for those relationships, right? India's relationship with Egypt and for the other countries in the region. That's the impression I get from how his influence continued to be felt even though his period there was very short.
So India's first diplomatic relationship with any Arab world country was with Egypt. And he was made ambassador to Egypt, and concurrently he was also Indian ambassador to Transjordan and to Lebanon. So he was able to establish a relationship with not just the monarchy in Egypt, because at that time it was ruled by King Farouk, but also with the Arab League and with, let's say, some elements of the Muslim Brotherhood who were in opposition to the monarchy. So despite the fact that the monarchy disappeared when Nasser took over power, India's good relationship continued. And it is sort of significant that Nehru, Nasser, and Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia were the first founders of the non-aligned movement at that time.
It is. That is tidbits of personalities who have played a huge role in policy decisions for countries. It's one of those light bulb moments. It feels good to understand these connections, I think. Saras Ganapati wants to know, did Mr. Hussain play any role in World War II, and where was he during that time?
So during World War II, Syed Hussain, so Syed Hussain joined the University of Southern California as a professor of Indian history almost throughout the 1930s. It was in 1939 or 40 that he left the university to be an independent speaker. So during the Second World War, he was very much in the United States, and he was a very sought after speaker to speak on the radio and of course in public lectures about his view of the world. And he predicted quite accurately that Japan would certainly side with the other dictatorial countries in the world like Germany and Italy, and his prophecy came true. And in 1941, the United States actually joined the Allies when Pearl Harbor was bombed in December 1941.
Yeah. He also did that world tour. He came back to Calcutta after a long gap and that right?
Yeah, that was in 1937-38 when he did a world tour and visited Calcutta after a gap of almost about 20 years.
Yeah. that uh, that exile is another interesting story that you go into in the book. It was self-imposed in some ways, but also makes us wonder about his relationship with Gandhi, whom he admired greatly, but Gandhi seemed to have preferred that he do his work outside at that point. So those are um, I I like those elements of the book, that you were able to honestly go into what impact personalities would have had on choices. Um, this is a question again about, this is something that comes up in the book. Isabella Simon's question is, did he play a role in the Caliphate movement? What role did Hussein play in that? I think that's the question here.
So, Syed Hussein was a prominent member of the Khilafat movement, and he was part of the first delegation that went to England in 1920 to meet with Prime Minister Lloyd George to plead for the Khilafat case. However, their mission was not successful. And of course, once Turkey became, the monarchy in Turkey disappeared, the whole Khilafat movement sort of died down. So I think it was a very brief period, this whole Khilafat movement and Syed Hussein's involvement in it. But that certainly finds a mention in my book.
Yeah, I do remember it, and it's probably very earned his early chops on how to advocate for a cause, and yes, that's where he came in contact with many of the others.
First international foray.
Yeah, right, exactly. Priya Doraiswamy reminds us that there are maybe some interesting photos to share, and I think that's you have picked a few that may be worth.
I think
there are so many fascinating photos that you have found in your archive material, but a couple will be fun to see now. And if you could also put it in context a little bit, Vinod, that will be great.
Yeah, sure. So this is a photograph taken during 1925, when Syed Hussein, who's standing at extreme left, was the editor of his newspaper, the New Orient. And the lady next to him is Mrs. Julia Ford, the socialite I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And next to that is that famous poet, Khalil Gibran, whose prophet is so famous and sort of required reading when we were kids. Yeah. So this is a very famous photograph, quite a rare photograph of Syed Hussein, Julia Ford, and Khalil Gibran. Syed and Khalil Gibran were very close friends.
He really met some very fascinating people. Even you mentioned his magazine, The Orient, earlier when you were talking about somebody who had done research. He got some amazing people to write for that magazine too, right? Like
a lot of Nobel Prize names. Yeah. Oh, this is another interesting picture. Okay. So this shows Syed Hussein when he visited India in 1938. Syed Hussein is standing second from left, and the person next to him is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Incidentally, today is Subhash Chandra Bose's birthday too.
Oh, really?
It is his 124th birthday. And of course, it was celebrated all over India. Prime Minister Modi was in Calcutta, sharing a stage with Mamata Banerjee. Okay, but let's not get into that. But yes, so Syed Hussein, Netaji next to him, and just in front of Netaji, sitting there, is Sarojini Naidu. Incidentally, Sarojini Naidu and Syed Hussein again shared a very, very close relationship. There are heaps of correspondence between them. The problem is that Sarojini Naidu's handwriting is so bad that I was not able to decipher even one letter of that. But I'll leave it to a future historian to do that.
Take that on, yeah. Syed Hussein is remarkably good looking in all these pictures. One has to register that, right? Yeah. Which will make
So this was the farewell given to Syed Hussein when he left the United States. This was in March 1946. Syed Hussein can be seen below the largest picture there, just below that. And sitting on either side of him are two of his Indian colleagues, Anup Singh to his right and Krishnalal Shridrani to his left. There are, of course, other famous people in the photograph. I can see Taraknath there at the right hand, lower right hand corner. And then, of course, the famous dancer Ragini Devi, who is sitting on the
Ragini.
left at the table. She's got a sari over her head, a
Head,
pallu.
okay. Okay,
Yeah, that
okay.
is Ragini Devi, and her daughter Indrani Rahman is sitting at the same table. So this
Very cool.
farewell of Syed Hussain was attended by the glitterati of New York. And oh yeah, so this is Syed Hussain in Cairo. That is Mr. Azam Pasha of the Arab League, who's wearing the fez and standing next to Nehru. So this was taken in 1948, October 1948, when Nehru was returning to India. He passed through Cairo. He was returning from Paris after attending the UN session.
Such
This is the famous photograph of the Komagata Maru, taken in May 1914. These were all the Sikhs who were on that ship who were not allowed to get on board back, get down into Vancouver. And the person in the gray suit is Gurdeep Singh. He was the leader of this entire group of people. A very historic photograph.
It is. It's that story was very moving and powerful. I also, in reference to that photo, I was also struck by how the community came together and provided the legal support and food and clothing. So even though they didn't get down from the ship, there was community support for them, which I thought was very impressive. No?
Yes. I think they did that with not just Komagata Maru, but also some of the previous ships they came.
Right.
They gave them legal aid, they gave them food, provided them with all the facilities that a new immigrant would require.
Very, very impressive level of organization and effort there. I was taken with that history. The next question, Mani wants to know, what did you find hardest about writing the book? And having finished this as a first-time author, would you look back and do anything differently?
The hardest part was actually Syed Hussein's early life. The documentation on that was very, very sparse. And that is where Syed Hussein's nephew was incredibly helpful to me, not just with recollections of his own family's history, but also providing me rare photographs, some old newspaper articles, and of course, like I said, family memories. There are some papers of that early life in Nehru Memorial Library, but the documentation of his later life is far more as compared to his earlier life.
It's interesting.
So if I had a chance, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. If you had a chance, please go ahead.
Oh, if I had a chance, I would probably try and research more on his earlier life. Maybe spend a lot more time digging out details from, I don't know, I'll have to even find the sources to dig up.
No, I think you've still provided us a strong flavor of his early days. Maybe you would like more paperwork there, but the details about... Yeah, but I was intrigued by details like his application to college and the referral letters that he got. And there's a lot of material there, we know. That was, it gave a flavor of the kind of student he was, all his, the level of impression he made on the people who wrote referral letters for him. Even though he didn't do well in that exam, he's still a good candidate. Kind of detail was impressive.
He was weak in maths.
Yes.
He was weak in maths, but excellent in literature. Exactly. Something a lot of us share with him.
Yeah, I thought so. You found a lot of detail, but I understand what you mean about maybe you'd like to explore some more specifics around where he stayed and what he did. Srinivasan Padmanabhan asked this question. I think you sort of addressed it. What about his stint in Egypt? Was he responsible in any way for building bridges? I think you had. Between Nehru and Nasser, which influenced India's position on Suez Canal crisis and later got both countries to advocate the non-alignment movement.
Specifically that Syed Hussain was not alive. So Syed Hussain died in 1948. So he was not associated with Nasser, nor did he get involved in the Suez Canal incident of 1956.
Yeah. Um, to paraphrase Sachdev Ramakrishna's question, he congratulates you on the book and then he goes on to ask, I'm still curious about why this tale, given your travels around the world and potentially other subjects that might have been fascinating to you, why is it this story that fascinated you, I guess is his question.
Sachdev, like I said, that tomb is what inspired me to write the story.
Yeah.
The fact that someone with such a high degree of achievement was completely forgotten, buried in Cairo with a tomb so badly maintained, it sort of evoked some kind of an emotion in me. I said, look, how can we treat such a person like this? So let me do something to bring him alive. And like I said initially, it was supposed to be a blog post, but it just expanded into a book.
You found too much material. I think that's what it is. And the question one of the things that you mentioned about early on when you saw the tomb was, why is he buried in Cairo and not in India? Did you want to, do you want people to read and find out why you think he chose to
Yes,
stay there?
that's something
Yes.
I don't want to talk about. Let them,
Yeah.
because that, it
It,
covers the whole book. So
yes,
yeah.
it does. It is a very telling part of what his life was, I think. This is something he was definitely a man worthy of great admiration, but there is also this feeling of sadness at the end of it all, in terms of a life lived in support of India and India's cause and Indian freedom. And I I don't want to. He's not a figure of tragedy because he led a very consequential life. He made big. He made a big impact, but there is definitely sense of there is a sense of sadness about not that he's not in India. To me, there was that sense of sadness. So,
Yes.
what was your take? How did you feel personally when you finished writing the book about the person that was Syed Hussein?
I so one thing is that had he been in India, he could have contributed a lot more. He could have probably been an effective foil to Jinnah, given that both of them came from a similar background. Maybe another Muslim leader of the same caliber of Jinnah,
Statue.
perhaps. So that is one thing. The second is that, okay, he was in the United States, he achieved a lot, but we just forgot about him. There's not even a bylane in India which is named after him, but in Egypt, there is a road named after him. That is the telling point, and that is the sad part of it. That the only memorial to him is to be found in Egypt, where he lived just 1 year of his life. Nothing in India, nothing in the United States.
I hope your book sparks a conversation and interest in him because he's worthy of being remembered. That is definitely true. So that will be. I'm very grateful you got to finish and publish the book. Where can we buy the book? Elizabeth George is asking. Do you have specific outlets that you'd like to mention?
Oh, it's available on Amazon.in, Amazon.com, and in very many bookshops in Bangalore. In fact, Bookworm on Church Street will actually give you a special price. Um, so Bookworm is the bookshop out here, which I would recommend, and of course Amazon.in, Amazon.com, both for Kindle versions as well as print versions.
Local bookstores, wherever people are located, otherwise online bookstores, I guess they're
Yeah.
available everywhere. And yeah, it's a beautiful hard copy edition for those who can see behind Vinod, and it's a worthy addition to any bookshelf, I think. And I, I believe there are other. I mean, yeah, it's a beautiful copy. I like that picture on the cover too. For somebody as thoughtful and as eloquent as he was, Syed Hussein did not leave behind a memoir of his life and work. You touch upon this briefly in the prologue. I'm reading Mani's question. Do you find this surprising? If he had, do you think he would look back with satisfaction and pride or with some regret? How come he didn't write and publish more? I know there is speech. Oh, this is the other point. You have given speeches, the transcript of his speeches, but you couldn't find any video or audio recording, you said, right?
No, I could find, there was obviously no video recording of those days. It was,
Yeah.
but a contemporary video of Sarojini Naidu certainly exists. I mean, she
Yeah.
visited the United States in 1929. That's something which you can find on YouTube, but none of Syed Hussein. I tried with the Egyptian Broadcasting Company. I tried with some of the US networks, but no one seems to have an audio recording of him. So that is one part. So is there a second part to that question?
I believe he hasn't published anything on, Syed Hussein hasn't, none of his writings were published, right? He didn't write anything for publication kind of thing.
You know, there was a lot that he wrote, which has been published, but not on himself. I mean, he was
Okay.
editor of newspapers, magazines, articles of his were published in various newspapers around the world, but there was nothing autobiographical about any of his writings.
Oh, right. He did not leave behind a memoir of his life and work. That's right. Okay. That's what we were talking about. This is, this is a very Syed spelling, Syud. Viju Parameshwar is wondering, that's an unusual spelling. Do you know why he chose to spell it that way? But that, I mean, do you have an answer for that?
So Syed's ancestors kept that spelling.
Yeah.
And I believe the name Syed as a prefix to one's name indicates that one is a lineal descendant of the Prophet Muhammad.
Oh,
So even today, Syed Hussein's nephew, Mr. Syed Iqbal Ahmad, spells his name as Syud.
oh, okay. So there is a tradition of that also, that spelling also. To jump to that earlier point that we were talking about, his magazine, The Orient, and the kind of people whom he got to write to it. So he really had a extensive network. Some of the people who contributed to it were big name people in his time, no?
Oh, those were the intellectuals of his age. Bertrand
Yeah.
Russell, H.G. Wells, Albert Einstein, Rabindranath Tagore, B.G. Horniman, Sarojini Naidu. I mean, you name the intellectual,
Yeah.
you will find them out there. Yeah.
And that was very impressive. Again, like the Khalil Gibran photo, it's an indication of the circles he was moving in and the people who he was influencing and being influenced by. So that is really an interesting insight into what his life was in the United States at that time. Could you say something more about the loose seller bill? Pratiti Dalal is asking that question. His Syed Hussein's role in that bill.
So there were two organizations in the United States in the 40s. One was the Indian League of America, which was headed by J.J. Singh. And there was a parallel organization headed by Syed Hussein, which was called the National Committee for India's Freedom. So both these organizations in parallel lobbied with the politicians and the other influencers in America to restore citizenship rights to Indians, and in a similar fashion to what the Chinese got. So a few years earlier, the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed and citizenship was given to the Chinese with a certain quota every year. So these people lobbied for a similar kind of a thing. And the climax of their efforts resulted in the Loose Seller Bill, which was signed by President Truman in 1946.
Yeah.
There's more of this available
Yeah.
on the on Wikipedia or whatever, which gives the stages of how this bill came to. And I too sort of briefly cover that in the book.
Yeah, in your book, the context of each of their personalities and roles makes it sort of a different kind of version, an intimate look at history, so to speak, because of the people involved and how they all interacted with each other. The other question here is, what would you think will be the key takeaways from this book? I think I will answer that partly because you wrote the book, and my takeaway would be that there is much we don't know about Indian history, much we don't know about Indian American history, and it's all interesting to learn because it's not irrelevant to where we are today. So I do think it's worth spending time and effort for people to write books like this and for people to buy books like this and to read these books, because these stories need to be told. And it's that's my takeaway, that these stories are worth telling and worth reading and worth listening.
So let me just add one point to that.
Yeah.
We've been, over the last few years, American politics has been consumed by what Trump has been saying, that he's a racist, he's a bigot, whatever. But you know, all of this didn't start with Trump. If you see American history, it all started in the 19th century. Started with the Chinese Exclusion Act. So what we are seeing in the 21st century is just a continuation of whatever started then. And that is what I sort of try and do very briefly here, to give a history of Indian immigration, to set the context for how the rules and regulations in the US continued to be racist.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Indian American history part of it, where you've captured the layers, it's and I like the fact that you made it unvarnished, that some of the choices Indian Americans made were not necessarily noble or good, but that is how history has to be recorded, right? I mean, Bhagat Singh Thinn's argument about being more white than black is very problematic for those of us who are very aware of what racial history is. But it is something that needs to be recorded. These are the steps along which things have developed, and that's how citizenship has come. And I, both in Indian history and in Indian American history, I appreciated the fact that you didn't try to sugarcoat anything. You kept it real, and it feels
Like I said,
important to acknowledge it.
I was a chronicler,
Yes,
so I did not
yeah.
take sides.
Yes,
So
you
let
didn't
the
take
historian
sides.
take the side.
You could have opted to leave out some things and you didn't, and I think that makes it compelling reading because of that. And that's one of the things so that is a big takeaway. If you need to understand things, you need to understand all versions of it and not just things that make you feel happy today and feel rara, so that was a good thing. I believe we have wrapped up the Q&A that I can see. So to sort of wrap up on a fun note, I want to go back to what you were talking about, trying to make a movie or a series out of the book. I really think the potential is endless there. If it's okay, do you want to speculate on who can play Syed Hussain? If you choose to, if it becomes a movie?
No, I'm not speculating.
We won't go there. Okay, that sounds good. I'm going to put
We
in
don't
a
want to
pitch
give
for.
all scope to all these actors and actresses.
Well, I'm going to put in a pitch for Riz Ahmed. I think he'll be a fantastic Syed Hussain. I think it's Vinod. I think we have covered all the things we were hoping to cover. No?
Wonderful. So I just want to thank everyone for joining in on the conversation today. Thank you very much, and thank you, Shobha, and thank you, Lekha, for coordinating the show. Much appreciated. Thanks very much, everyone. And please do read the book. I'm
Yes.
sure there are a lot of things you may agree with, not agree with, but nonetheless, there's a facet of history that the book talks about, which is probably not well known.
Yeah. Yeah, I join along with Vinod in thanking everyone for making this happen. It was a lot of fun. And thanks for everyone who joined us from everywhere, because I think it's nice to do these virtual events because more people can get to hear about books like this. So thank you very much, BIC, for making it possible. And Vinod, great book. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Shobha. Thank you,
Bye,
Lekha.
guys.
Stringing together lost strains of history and to be able to put this powerful story forward and held up with such great archival material has been a fascinating and a tantalizing taste to this slice of Indian and global history. Thank you, Vinod, for bringing this story to light and for your great research. Thank you, Shobha, for being such a insightful interlocutor and for being so generous with your time. You both have helped paint a very a vivid picture, and what better way to mark one's birth and life, a life so purposeful and passionate and profound. I'm sure our audience members will agree when I say we look forward to reading the book and seeing that film. Any filmmakers out there, do take note. I have the eyebrows to play Sarojini Naidu.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience, for joining us. Good night and see you next time.
Thank you.